The Indian economy's 8.2% GDP growth has dominated global news headlines as India remains the fastest growing economy in the global top 50, despite Trump's tariff tantrums. The BSE Sensex has been on a rise since the past week. With this, Prime Minister Modi's strategy has not just defied but smashed US tariff drama.
टॉप 5 इकोनॉमीज में से एक बन गया है.
Prime Minister Modi stated, "It reflects the impact of our pro-growth policies and reforms. It also reflects the hard work and enterprise of our people." Unquote. But now, US-dominated IMF is questioning India's data. Maybe they want to justify Donald Trump's dead economy jibe aimed at Bharat. This is the same tactic which Trump had used when he lost the previous US election. The same tactic India's grand old party still uses after losing election after election for years now. The IMF didn't question India's data when the growth was 5%. So why is it suddenly questioning now when the growth is 8.2%? Do you believe paid Western interests are behind the surge of anti-India propaganda? We'll tell you which factors are behind India's stunning growth story. Manufacturing is at all-time high and public consumption is soaring. So stay with us. Here's another data that will shock the West. Between 2000 and 2024, India's per capita income growth is more than 500%, which is among the best in all G20 nations and much higher than even the United States, Germany, or the United Kingdom. This means a bigger Indian middle class, more spending power, healthier food, better healthcare, better education, and access to cutting-edge technology. Today, India is finally realizing its true growth potential, and this has rattled the West. If you search the term India-Pakistan, then you will see that Inconnectnews report is ranking #1 for the day on Google News videos. I am Shobhit Mittal. Do subscribe to Inconnect News for the most informative news content. In fact, India has now been ranked as the only major power in Asia and Indo-Pacific after Operation Sindoor war victory over Pakistan. Even ahead, the likes of Japan and Russia. India is the 4th biggest global economy and soon will eclipse Germany to enter its rightful place in the top 3. This has caused a meltdown in Pakistan. Pakistani TV channels, they cannot digest India's global rise anymore.
250 मिलियन पाकिस्तान का कंज्यूमर है, but the world is not paying much attention to this too.
ये उनके और हमारे दरमियान जो इकोनॉमिक एंड टेक्नोलॉजिकल फासला है वो बढ़ता जा रहा है.
But you wouldn't believe it. Pakistan itself is ranked 4th in the world. Data suggests Pakistan is 4th highest in the ranking list among the nations ranked the worst in the world for women. The top 4 countries worst for women are Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, and then Pakistan. All these top 4 countries have something common in their core. Can you guess what it is? Leave a comment below. India's economic growth is the fastest in the last 6 quarters now, Prime Minister Modi added. The 8.2% GDP growth in Q2 of 2025-26 is very encouraging. Our government will continue to advance reforms and strengthen ease of living for every citizen. Unquote. The growth was driven primarily by private domestic consumption and resilient services sectors. The manufacturing sector saw an unbelievable 9.1% growth. Construction sector grew by an impressive 7.2%, and even agriculture saw a 3.5% increase. Chief Economic Advisor V. Anantha Nageswaran stated, "Now we can comfortably say full year growth will be 7% or north of 7%. In the July to September period, real GDP grew to 48.6 lakh crore rupees from 44.9 lakh crore rupees a year earlier, marking a growth rate of 8.2%, whereas nominal GDP jumped 8.7% to 85.2 lakh crore rupees compared with 78.4 lakh crore rupees. The growth surpassed the expectation even of the Reserve Bank of India, which had pegged it at 7%. Three major factors behind the unexpected performance are softer inflation, GST tax cuts, and government spending. Before the 8.2% growth in Q2 FY26, the economy had grown by 7.8% in Q1 FY26 and 7.4% in Q4 FY25, indicating sustained growth unaffected by global geopolitical turmoil. But what is most surprising is that the US tariffs seem to have had no impact at all on India's rise. The world is now importing Indian goods and seeking Indian talent. Since the unfair and hypocritical US tariffs in August, India has taken the so-called dead economy jibe in its stride and then accelerated its growth. Was that comment against India proving to be Trump's biggest geopolitical blunder? No wonder that Prime Minister Modi remains the most popular global leader while Donald Trump's ratings are barely above the passing marks. To counter Trump's 50% tariff charges on Indian goods exported to America, the Modi government announced major GST tax reductions before the Diwali festive season. The cuts came into effect on 22nd of September and immediately boosted domestic consumption, giving consumers confidence to spend more. Consumer demand reached sky high in October with record-breaking sales in the auto sector as well as gold. Despite tariff chaos, India's goods trade deficit also hit a new low, even as gold imports surged. The International Monetary Fund still remains cautious on India. CNBC quoted the IMF stating, quote, India's real GDP is projected to grow 6.6% in fiscal year 2026 before moderating to 6.2% in fiscal 2027, assuming a prolonged delay in US-India trade deal, unquote. But despite questioning data, despite negative Western propaganda, the IMF still acknowledged India as a global growth engine in a highly turbulent world. IMF stated, despite external headwinds, growth is expected to remain robust, supported by favorable domestic conditions, unquote. The IMF maintains that India's rise is going to be slower than anticipated, but still, Bharat will reach the $5 trillion economy milestone by 2029, on par with Germany's GDP of $5.01 trillion currently. For the United States of America, GDP growth was estimated at 2% to 2.5%, which reflected a slower than expected rise due to global economic challenges and Trump's unpredictable and restrictive monetary policy. Similarly, China's GDP growth for months of July to September was pegged at 4.5% to 5%. So India remains the fastest at 8.2%, followed by China at 4.5 to 5%, and then the United States at 2% to 2.5%. However, the world's two economies are much larger, and even lower growth rates do suggest a positive outlook. India's growth story created quite a buzz on social media as well. One of the users wrote on X, when they laughed and called India's economy dead, India said, hold my chai. 8.2% GDP growth, fastest growing major economy again, Jai Hind. Another user wrote, we just crushed every analyst forecast. India is equal to world's fastest growing major economy right now, unquote.
आज विश्व में सबसे तेज गति से आगे बढ़ने वाला देश है.
The Indian Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal had stated earlier this year, in less than a decade, India came out of the fragile 5 economies and has now become the fastest growing economy of the world. It is expected that we will be the 3rd largest economy in a few years. Today, global institutions and economists see India as a bright spot in the global economy, unquote. All that remains now is for President Trump to remove the unfair 50% tariffs to below 15% and an India-US trade deal to push bilateral trade towards the $500 billion mark, as decided during Prime Minister Modi's visit to the White House in February this year. Yet since then, President Trump seems busy hosting army chiefs of failed terror state like Pakistan and photo ops with former Al-Qaeda commanders in the White House. If you understand President Trump's strategy, then do explain in the comments section. India remains the fastest growing economy and the world's largest democracy. A trade deal with the United States will only happen if it is beneficial to both the countries, else not at all. So what do you believe? Will India become the third biggest global economy by 2030? Leave a comment with your opinion, hit the like button and subscribe to Inconnect News.